University's debating championships. This is not a debate about whether or not we should leave countries after an intervention. This is a debate about whether it is better to leave these countries now or to leave them later. The dichotomy is not leaving and staying, it is leaving now or leaving later. That is something opposition have serially, ladies and gentlemen, failed to understand. I'm going to be summarising this debate under three areas. I'm going to talk to you first of all about what happens in these regions if we leave now. I'm going to talk secondly to you about what happens in these regions if we leave later. I'm going to talk to you thirdly and finally about the effect that this proposition has on support back home, the effect that the proposition has in the country doing the intervening, and why that's good for future interventions. For that, one thing that needs clarifying, this issue of what if the population don't want you to leave, ladies and gentlemen. The difficulty here is the second opposition have misunderstood the logical nature of the definition of the motion, ladies and gentlemen. We are not claiming, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a necessary condition that the population wants you to leave, simply that it is a sufficient condition. It may well still be the case that at some point, regrettably, the population would like us to stay, but we have to leave because we simply cannot carry on. That's unfortunate, no thank you, but not what this debate is about. Ex hypothesi, we are dealing with those countries, ladies and gentlemen, where the population do desire us to leave. So, now that that's been clarified, let's get on with the debate. Sorry, how long have I had? 1 minute 25 on this. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, let's get on with this. Let's talk first about what happens in these countries if we leave now. Well, the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that repeatedly we've had our opposition claims that things are going to get really, really bad. So we've had quite a lot of claims about there's going to be warlords, etc., all these ideas from Jack, there's going to be a collapse of destabilisation and so on. We say a few things in response. We think, first of all, we do have very good prima facie reason to think that these human rights abuses will not continue, simply because the population want us to leave. We've had a lot of ideas out of opposition about why basically these populations are a bit thick, and probably not going to realise, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, that in fact the human rights abuses and the genocide are going to carry on because they lack information, whatever. As we said, if a genocide has just happened and you have received no further information, we think you are likely to presume, ladies and gentlemen, that you would rather troops stay. We think moreover, ladies and gentlemen, that these people have a very strong incentive to inform themselves. Unlike the American population, they have a very strong incentive to inform themselves about what the political situation in their country is. That's something that was never responded to. We have this idea that it's very rational of them. They might, ladies and gentlemen, want to settle it themselves. We are not the hero they need, ladies and gentlemen. Fine. Like, if we're not the hero they need, we should leave. If they genuinely, ladies and gentlemen, would rather risk persecution for other people, we actually think that they have a right to do so. We think these people would genuinely prefer a risk of persecution from another minority group than continuing occupation by an alien power, and that is a legitimate preference and one that we are duty-bound to respect. So, moreover, we think that they're not idiotic to think this, ladies and gentlemen, where they do believe that there won't be these kinds of abuses. We think that these kinds of human rights abuses also do massively undermine the credibility of the government who perpetrated them. Witness the credibility of the Idi Amin government being massively undermined by the abuses perpetrated during the 1970s. We think in a democratic system, that obviously means they are likely to lose out in the next election. But even in non-democratic systems, we think that empowers the kinds of elements who might be looking to perpetrate a coup against the government. But ladies and gentlemen, even if, the government does remain in place, even if the government who is carrying out these abuses does remain in power, we think we can give the kinds of over-the-horizon guarantees that you talked about, and make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that these people don't want us to arrive back in the country again. There is still a cost to having a humanitarian intervention in your country, ladies and gentlemen, even if your government is not removed from power. We recognise that, of course, it's going to be politically possible to re-intervene. Of course, we didn't promise that the population don't want us there. We said the population don't want us there unless there are further human rights abuses. Thus, if there are further human rights abuses, we're going to safely assume that the population wants us there. That's what makes it politically possible to re-intervene. Thank you. Finally, we have this idea that if you leave now, ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be massive refugee flows. That's going to hugely destabilise the regional area. Well, we think, ladies and gentlemen, that this is an illegitimate preference in many cases. If you want a country to continue to, if you want your neighbour to continue to remain under occupation for your own internal political reasons, we don't think you have a right to do that. We don't think Tanzania has a right to demand that other countries remain under occupation against their will. Thank you. Even if the population of that country does not sign it. So, ladies and gentlemen, what happens if we leave later? Harish.
So, how do you think it plays if you try and re-intervene in the country when oppositions can simply say they didn't want our help or we failed last time?
We think it's possible to re-intervene when you've issued an over-the-horizon agreement, and oppositions can't say they don't want our help. The most they could possibly say is they don't want our help unless there's a further massacre, and thus if there is a further massacre, they might want our help. So, if we stay, you do see ongoing insurgencies. For the kinds of things you generate an imputation of the motives of the occupying power. It becomes increasingly thought that the power is only there for its own ends. No, thank you. I think moreover, you make the country just less able to cope on its own when you do finally leave. Partly because you make it much easier for these insurgents to arm and recruit themselves to the point at which you do eventually leave, as opposition admit they must. We think you get a kind of reciprocal mission. Not a mission people's bending about, but as huge one, an increasing dependency of the governments and the bureaucracies within that country on the military structures that you have provided. We think increasingly, ladies and gentlemen, this country grow to be unable to function effectively on their own. We think the less time you spend in this country, the less damage you do to the existing political and bureaucratic systems within that country, and therefore, the more likely they are to be able to remain stable. Moreover, the longer you stay, the more you encourage regional conflict, because you give other actors an incentive to intervene to get at the occupying power. Witness Iranian meddling in Iraq as a way of getting at America. Witness Iranian meddling via Hezbollah in Lebanon during the Israeli occupation as a way of getting at Israel. So long as the Western power is occupying this country, people who are anti-Western have a strong incentive to do so. We don't buy, ladies and gentlemen, that there's going to be a long period of peace, whereas Jack told you they're going to be able to recognise all the wonderful fruits of democracy, simply because there isn't going to be a long period of peace. Look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan, look at the West Bank, ladies and gentlemen. Occupation does not make peace. Occupation makes further war. So, ladies and gentlemen, finally, let's talk about the effect that this has back home. Because we recognise that trust in future interventions is massively undermined when we lead into this kind of long-term occupation. We think that Iraq and Nicaragua show that it is deeply ambiguous when is it what it is that a country is there for. We think, no thank you, the Western government is only able to effectively say to its own citizens that we're there for humanitarian reasons. It can only say that credibly if there is a commitment to leave the minute it goes. That means, ladies and gentlemen, that we can spend our finite resources of financial and political capital upon as many interventions as are necessary. That's a way of ensuring the universality of human rights. The King's Inn we're claiming to be so worried about, and that's a way, ladies and gentlemen, of making sure we can do this in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, because of this, I'm very, very proud to propose. Thank you.